Hi everyone, I'm Marios. I am Group Business Information Security Officer for Columbia Group, and today we are going to talk about the cybersecurity for port operations during this NIS2 era. And it's an era because it's something that came in one night and touched horizontally a lot of organizations, and also private entities, which in the past was not that the case, but yeah. Now, I will walk you through the current landscape, the 4 pillars of cyber resilience, and what NIS2 means in practice for operators and service providers. So you can see that the last years, ports have been hit really well, I was going to say. So they are in the center of every attack, serious attack, advanced persistent threat. That means it can cause disruptions to international supply chains, to cargoes, and it can have huge financial impact. One of the most well-known examples of that was the attack that happened to Maersk at the APM terminals. It was a ransomware attack, and it took around 1 week plus, completely shutdown of operations, and that cost around 300 million. A lot of others, 2018, Costco, you have Port of Houston in 2021, Port of Los Angeles in 2022, DP World in 2023. So we can see that they are attractive targets. So that, okay. Now, let's start with the port threats and impacts. Why we start with that? The most important thing is to start by identifying what you have. The problem is that most of the entities and most of the companies do not know about their real assets. And then, after they identify their real assets, services, what they offer, then they can map all the risks and the impact that they were going to have. So I'm not going to go in really depth on that, but NISA created a really good visual that shows, for example, critical high category services on ports. It's vessel breathing services, vessel loading and unloading services, temporary storage staying services, distribution and transfer services, support services. And underneath, there are assets supporting all these services, which are mobile infrastructure, network communication systems, OT devices that they are loading and unloading, ITN devices, tablets that they are moving around to Wi-Fi networks. So that means, let's take an example. Imagine you have a 20 million load that needs to be unloaded, and the custom system is down for 1 day and needs to be go outside of customs, let's say. So imagine this thing happening for 1 week. What is going to happen? So it's a huge impact. So that means they need to invest in this sector. Now, what are the main threats? So as I said, identifying assets. It was mentioned before, the life cycle of governance risk compliance, but what are the threats and what are the impacts that we have? So we take the assets that we have, we identify the threats on these assets, and then we identify the impact that we can have on them. We can see, for example, some impacts: shutdown of operations, human injuries, sensitive critical data theft, cargo goods stealing. So that was a really good example for the security cameras that was mentioned before during the panel, that it's really important in how AI can facilitate all this environment to be more cyber secure while a lot of people are sleeping, let's say, and the patrols maybe cannot facilitate that. It's part of cybersecurity, because cybersecurity is not only about confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the systems. That means it touches also different aspects that we are thinking of, physical injuries and so on. Now, the 4 pillars that I was mentioning before. The 4 pillars is, first of all, we need to have cyber risk management. What that means? It means identifying our exposure, assessing impact, and prioritizing the controls that we are going to use based on our business critical operations. The second thing is real-time monitoring and detection. That means maintaining 24/7 visibility through a security operations center that ensure that all these potential threats that I have mentioned before are detected before they escalate. The third thing is incident management and digital forensics. What is that? We need to have methodologies because the attack is going to happen with one or the other way. The point is who is able to survive fast and recover fast. So the incident management, the incident techniques, how we are going to have the whole life cycle of an incident response, it's what is justifying it. And the forensics readiness is something that is going to be required also based on the regulation, but also to identify the lessons learned. So let's say an attack happens. How are we going to identify what really happened if I don't have information to support and investigate what happened? So the same thing can happen, and maybe I have no idea that it's from the same cause. So we need this information. And finally, the continuous compliance. As I said, in one night, something is enforced. Also, it was mentioned in EU by Christina, I think. So this continuous compliance with NIS2 that came up initiated a whole new life cycle in cybersecurity and is pushing all the industries, let's say, to safeguard their resilience. Now, let's dive in a little bit now in the 4 pillars, because the 4 pillars were a bit more high level. First of all, cyber risk management. You need GRC platforms, like the one that the speaker from KVH showed. So import all these standards in one platform. There are a lot of standards that our industry needs to comply with. And that means we have to cross-check all these controls that, okay, I initiate one control, for example, security monitoring, and you have NIS2, you have IMO, you have. So you import all these requirements, and then you cross-check and you connect these controls so you know live how compliant you are. Do I have this? Yes. A new legislation comes tomorrow with one of the same controls, then you know that you already have it in place. The second thing is you have to power up your security operations. That means technical capabilities of the organization. You need data. Data are there. The point is how you collect them. You collect them in a centralized security event management system. You have the visibility there. You know the thresholds of your organization and what is an anomaly and what not. You create alerting rules and you proactively detect things that are going to happen in advance. You need the classic XDR systems, that means endpoint detection and response capabilities, vulnerability management cycles. Dark web monitoring is going to give you insights on my organization is exposed because our users are using their business emails to register in a shop, in an online shop, and they are using the same password, and they are exposed. I can have this information in advance because this information is available on darknet. But you need this intelligence to fit you in advance that this user is vulnerable, and inform this user in advance to make sure that it's not cross-checking with the organization. Now, let's go to NIS2. NIS2 has a lot of requirements, and I will say first of all what is NIS2, because NIS2 is a directive that the EU established to be able to measure and enforce a high common level of cybersecurity to all the essential and important organizations that exist in the whole EU. For example, I am a service provider, I'm an ISP service provider, that means internet service provider, and I operate also in Cyprus and in Greece. And I have systems that maybe are interconnected. The level of cybersecurity needs to be equal on both sides. And because there are cross-organization collaborations, that means it makes vulnerable one country to another. That's why they had to increase this level and say, okay, a lot of dependencies exist on the initial critical services that we have identified. For example, ports at the beginning, from the beginning they were in the scope. So that means all these third-party providers that they are offering me services, how I'm going to regulate them to make sure that they have sufficient cybersecurity controls. I do the best that I can as a port manager, as a CEO, as government, But I have 3 providers that they are crucial to me, that they don't have the basics, let's say, on cybersecurity. So I have to enforce them somehow, legally wise, how to do it. And this is what actually happened. There are some requirements, but the point is that now the directive emphasizes in the accountability, in the supply chain security, and the business continuity. And because now they enforced the incident reporting time frame, this is where the technical implementation come in. So it's not just a tick box. To be able to provide information to the authorities, for example, in Cyprus, the Digital Security Authority, to provide to them what happened to an incident that we had, you need data, you need event management system, you need technical controls in place to get this data, give it to them, so, and then being able to investigate, because the legislation says in 72 hours I need a preliminary report, and in 1 month I need a full investigation report. So this is really tricky. So it's not just a tick box. That's why Manos has half of his team working on NIS2. It's not just tick box. This is reporting obligations that I have just mentioned. It's really important to understand that that's the key of all the change that happened, for me, at least from my experience, based on the other requirements. And then again, everything lands to people, from my opinion. So technology is going to be there. The problem is that there is a huge skill gap that exists in the market to cover also all these requirements of the legislation. You can see on the screen there is a really good framework that was created by ENISA, which is called European Cybersecurity Skills Framework, which maps the roles that are needed to be able to implement all these requirements on the regulation. So some of them can be in-house, some of them can be managed services. It doesn't have to be all internally, but some of them needs to be internally for auditing purposes and for quality control of the output that, the input that comes into the organization. And that's all from my side. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me. I still have 2 minutes, so I was fast.